Hey, before anything else, can I ask you a quick favor? Your subscription is what keeps this channel alive. If you've ever felt something from this story or any of the others, or if this channel has ever made your day better, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps me way more than you can imagine. Now, let's get into the story. The royal halls of Valeria echoed with silence, heavy and brittle like the first frost of winter. Servants moved carefully, whispering behind polished wooden doors, their eyes averted and their steps cautious. Everyone knew better than to disturb Princess Catherine Blackwood, heir to the throne, daughter of the Iron King, and a woman whose gaze alone could reduce a soldier to shame. Catherine stood by the tall, arched window of her private study, arms crossed, her profile carved in stillness against the slate-gray sky. Below, the palace grounds buzzed with activity, a foreign envoy arriving, Asturian flags fluttering in the wind, and the unmistakable sound of wedding preparations filling the air like smoke. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until she would marry Lady Margaret Thorne of Astoria. And she hadn't so much as seen the woman's face. That was by choice. Her choice. "She's arrived, Your Highness," said Elric, her steward, voice gentle. "She's taken residence in the East Wing, as requested." Catherine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence had long since become its own form of language, one that her staff had learned to translate fluently. "There's a welcoming banquet tonight," the Queen Mother suggested. "I will not attend," Catherine interrupted. Elric hesitated only a moment. Understood. He bowed and left. Alone again, Catherine exhaled slowly. Her jaw ached from tension, her fingers twitching with the urge to pace. But she didn't move. Movement would mean uncertainty, and uncertainty had no place in her world. She didn't need to see Lady Margaret. She didn't want to see her, because once she did, the illusion would shatter. She'd have to confront the reality that the woman becoming her wife wasn't an idea, but a living person. A person with eyes, with hopes, with a heart. And Catherine couldn't afford to let herself care. Margaret Thorne, Maggie, as she still thought of herself, stood in the center of her new chambers, surrounded by silks and polished wood and a silence so vast it rang in her ears. The palace was beautiful, cold, intimidating. Nothing like Astoria, where courtyards burst with music and laughter spilled through the halls like wine. Here everything felt, watched, caged. She walked slowly to the window and stared out at the distant gardens. She dreamed, once, of love. Of a partner who would see her, know her, want her not because of alliances or strategy, but because of who she was. That dream had died with the announcement of her engagement to the Princess of Valeria, a woman reputed for her calculation and ice-veined discipline. But Maggie had still hoped. She'd hoped for conversation, for a moment of shared breath, for a smile. What she received instead was a week of locked doors, declined invitations, and whispered apologies from servants sent to speak in place of the woman she was meant to marry. She hadn't seen Catherine once, not even in passing. Tonight, at the banquet, she waited in a golden gown of Asturian silk, her hair pinned with amethyst combs, and her heart open despite the pain. She sat alone at a table of foreign nobility, her eyes flicking to the grand entrance every time a new figure appeared, until it became clear the princess would not come. Again. That night, Maggie wept in silence, alone in her room, clutching a letter she had never sent. Catherine knew about the tears. Her spies weren't spies, not really, just loyal staff with too much time and too much affection for sentiment. A maid had mentioned the lady's red eyes in passing, not knowing that the knowledge would settle in Catherine's chest like guilt. Still, she said nothing. She focused on state matters, border threats, military movements, anything but the ache she didn't have words for. Then the gifts began. A book of Valerian poetry, gently annotated in Maggie's hand. A hand-sewn ribbon in Valeria's royal colors. A pressed flower between pages, with the faintest scent of lavender. Letters. Short ones. Thoughtful. Curious. Never demanding. Catherine read them all. Always in private. Always pretending she hadn't. She never replied. Never acknowledged them. but they came faithfully. And Catherine found herself waiting for them, dreading them, needing them. One morning, she caught herself smiling at the curve of Maggie's handwriting and crushed the page in her hand, furious. 1 week until the wedding. Maggie sat alone in the palace library, surrounded by unread books. A storm painted shadows across the windows, and the air felt as heavy as her heart. "She won't see me," she murmured to herself. "She won't even look at me." "She has her reasons," said a voice behind her. Startled, Maggie turned to find an older woman in ceremonial blue. "Lady Genevieve, the Queen Mother." "I know my daughter," Genevieve said, settling beside her without invitation. "And I know she doesn't reject people out of cruelty. She rejects them out of fear." Fear of what? Of herself. Of what might happen if she opens the wrong door, and I can't close it again. She doesn't know me. That's precisely the danger. Maggie swallowed hard. I don't want to be her enemy. Then don't stop writing. 3 days before the wedding, Maggie left a final letter. No gift. No flower. Just words. "If you never speak to me, I will still honor you. If you never love me, I will still stand beside you. But I will not apologize for wanting more. For wanting you." Catherine didn't sleep that night. She sat alone in her war room, reading the letter again and again. And for the first time in a decade, her hand trembled. The wedding day dawned clear and cruel. The great hall was adorned with gold and violet, filled with dignitaries, nobles, and whispers. Maggie stood at the end of the aisle, her heart a quiet storm beneath her veil. Catherine entered in full ceremonial armor, her face carved from stone. She never looked at Maggie. Not once. Not even when she stood before her. The ceremony moved like a distant tide. Words spoken, oaths recited, rings exchanged. And still, Catherine never met her gaze. Then came the moment. The priest turned to them, his voice loud in the silence. "And now, you may lift the veil and seal this union with a kiss." Catherine's hand rose. Slowly. Mechanically. And then she lifted the veil. Maggie stood before her, eyes glistening with unspilled tears, lips curved in a soft, aching smile. Vulnerable. Steady. Beautiful. Catherine froze. Her world cracked. Everything she had built to keep people out, to keep herself safe, fractured beneath the weight of that one look. She had expected resentment, bitterness, coldness. Instead, she saw kindness, strength, hope. Despite everything, Catherine's hand cupped Maggie's cheek. Gently, reverently. "You waited for me," she whispered. "Even when I ran." "I was never going to stop," Maggie breathed. "Not unless you told me to." Catherine didn't speak. She just kissed her. And the world shifted. Catherine woke before the sun. The heavy velvet curtains of the royal bridal suite remained closed, trapping the room in half-darkness, but her senses were sharp. Her hand was still resting against the linen sheets, inches from Maggie's body. She hadn't moved all night. Neither Dallas. After the kiss that had unraveled every defense she'd built since childhood, Catherine had walked beside her new wife in complete silence to the royal bedchambers, allowed the maids to perform the ritual washing and departure, and then dismissed them all with a single look. Maggie hadn't said a word. She had only stood there, quiet and still in her gown, her hands clasped before her as if uncertain whether she was still welcome. And Catherine, despite every nerve screaming, had looked her in the eyes and said, "You may stay." Now, hours later, the soft rhythm of Maggie's breath beside her sent a tremor through Catherine's spine. She turned her head slightly, careful not to disturb the silence between them. Maggie slept curled toward her, dark hair falling over her cheek, her lips parted slightly. Even in sleep, her expression held a kind of strength Catherine didn't know how to name. She studied her, as if trying to memorize a truth too long denied. This woman, this stranger, had stood at an altar in front of 100 nobles and kissed her not with fear, but faith. And Catherine, who had sworn to feel nothing, had felt everything. A soft knock broke the moment. Catherine sat up straight. "Yes." A voice from the hall, The Queen Mother requests your presence at court. Alone. Catherine glanced back at Maggie. Still asleep. Still breathing softly. Still here. Tell her I'll come shortly. She rose from the bed, careful not to let the sheets rustle too much, and crossed to the adjoining chamber. She needed space. Distance. Anything that could remind her she was still in control. Maggie woke to the scent of roses and steel. Catherine was gone. The linens beside her still held the shape of her body, and something in her chest ached at the sight. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in a robe, the silence of the palace pressing in on her like a storm waiting to break. There had been no words after the ceremony, only a kiss that had felt too much like a dream.
She didn't know what it meant.
Not yet. But she remembered the softness in Catherine's touch, the way her thumb had brushed a tear from Maggie's cheek, the way her voice had cracked when she'd whispered, "You waited for me." Maggie moved to the window and pushed the curtains open. Light flooded the room, and with it came the weight of reality. She was a princess now. She was Catherine's wife. But was she wanted? Catherine strode through the royal corridors in full court attire, the weight of her armor replaced by a high-collared ceremonial coat in deep Valerian crimson. Her crown sat perfectly against her braided hair, and her eyes, cold and unreadable once more, scanned the hall ahead. When she entered the Queen Mother's solar, the older woman dismissed her attendants with a flick of her hand. "You looked shaken last night," she said without preamble. "I was not," Catherine replied flatly. "You lifted the veil and fell silent for 10 full seconds." "I was adjusting." "No, you were feeling." The Queen Mother rose, elegant as ever. "I told you she was not what you expected. She is not what anyone could expect. And yet she's here. Despite your silence. Despite your cruelty." Catherine flinched, almost imperceptibly. "That was strategy." "No," her mother said, walking toward her. "That was fear. And you cannot lead a kingdom and hide from your wife. I never asked for this union. And yet you accepted it. Like you accept everything you're given. But you forget, she is not a piece on your board. She is a soul. And if you break her, Catherine, you will lose more than a crown." Catherine said nothing. She only turned to the window and stared at the horizon, where the hills of Astoria were just barely visible. "Is she awake?" the Queen Mother asked. "Yes." "Then go to her."
"Speak."
"Begin." Maggie was sitting at the writing desk when Catherine returned. The morning light caught the gold in her hair, and the half-written letter before her blurred when she looked up. For a second, neither said anything. Catherine had never seen her this way, in soft linen, without ceremony, her guard down. She looked real.
Human.
And it was somehow more terrifying than her beauty beneath the veil. "I apologize for leaving so early," Catherine said. "Royal duty." "I understand." Maggie's voice was polite. Careful. Catherine hated how distant it sounded. She stepped closer. "You didn't sleep well." "It's difficult to sleep in unfamiliar rooms." "I can arrange." "I meant the unfamiliarity of the person beside me." Catherine stopped. Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. Maggie rose slowly from the chair and approached, leaving a breath space between them. "You kissed me last night," she said softly. "You could have avoided it. But you didn't." "Tradition," Catherine said, too quickly. "That wasn't a traditional kiss." Silence. Maggie tilted her head. "Did it mean something to you?" Catherine's hands clenched. She couldn't lie. Not to her. Not anymore. "Yes," she whispered. Maggie exhaled. "Then we start there. You deserve better than what I've given you. What I deserve is a chance to know you. To be known."
"Can you offer me that?"
Catherine looked down at her hands, calloused from swordplay, steady from politics, now trembling. "I can try." Maggie smiled, and it wasn't sad this time. It was warm, hopeful. "Then come sit with me. Tell me something no one else knows." Catherine blinked. "That's your first request as my wife?" "No," Maggie said, reaching for her hand. "That's my first invitation as your partner." And somehow, that word, partner, hit Catherine harder than any sword ever had. She followed her to the cushions by the window. and she began to speak. The first thing Catherine noticed was the stillness. Not silence. Valeria's palace was never truly quiet, but the particular kind of stillness that only existed between two people sharing breath without speaking. She sat cross-legged on the thick velvet cushions by the window, her back straight, hands clasped in her lap like a soldier awaiting interrogation. Maggie sat opposite her, more relaxed, her robe tied loosely at the waist, strands of her hair slipping from their braid. Morning had passed into late afternoon, and still they had not moved from the spot. "You keep your posture like a weapon," Maggie said gently. "Is it habit or defense?" Catherine's jaw flexed. "Both." "Can I ask you something?" "You already are." Maggie smiled faintly. "What did you expect when you first heard of the engagement?" Catherine looked down. "A stranger. An obligation. And now?" "You're still a stranger," she said truthfully, "but not an obligation." That admission made Maggie's heart clench in a way that wasn't entirely painful. "What am I, then?" Catherine was silent for a long moment. "A beginning." They spoke like that for hours, peeling back layers without ever calling it vulnerability. Love what you've seen so far and want to help me keep creating these awesome stories on this channel? Then subscribe and hit the bell. Your subscription supports the channel and makes sure you get more exciting stories. Catherine shared stories from her childhood, how her mother used to read her maps instead of fairy tales, how her first blade was forged on the morning of her 10th birthday. She spoke of diplomacy like war, of politics like a battlefield where emotions were liabilities. Maggie, in turn, spoke of Astoria's gardens, of how she learned to negotiate by calming arguments between her siblings, of her love for music and the days she used to sneak into ballrooms just to listen to rehearsals. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time a knock interrupted them. Elric entered, bowing low. "Your Majesties, the council requests your presence in the West Chamber. There's news." Catherine stood immediately, her expression shifting back into control. Maggie stood as well, heart sinking a little as the warm quiet between them dissolved like mist. "Come with me," Catherine said. Not as a command, but an invitation. Maggie followed. The West Chamber of the royal court was smaller than the throne room, but no less intimidating. Tall stained-glass windows lined the walls, casting blood-red light across the marble floor. 12 advisors stood around the circular table, murmuring until Catherine entered. The room fell silent. "Report," she said. One of the military generals stepped forward. "Scouts from the eastern border have returned." There was movement along the Blackridge path. Unidentified forces, armed, organized, and Asturian in origin. Maggie stiffened. Catherine's eyes darkened. "Astoria is our ally." These men wore no insignia, but their equipment, it bears markings of Asturian forges. "Could be mercenaries," another advisor added, "or dissenters." "Regardless," the general said, "they crossed into our territory. That alone is an act of aggression." Maggie's voice was calm but firm. "May I speak?" All heads turned. She stepped forward, the firelight catching in her eyes. "There are factions in Astoria who oppose this union. I won't deny that. But if someone is trying to sabotage the alliance, reacting with immediate aggression only plays into their hands. We must investigate, not retaliate." Murmurs followed. Catherine studied her wife. The clarity in her voice, the strength in her posture, the echo of something dangerously close to admiration stirred in her chest. "She's right," Catherine said at last. "We proceed with caution. No movement until we have confirmation." The council bowed and dispersed, leaving the two women alone in the flickering shadows. "You knew they'd question your loyalty," Catherine said. "Yes. And you still spoke. Because I am your wife. And because this alliance matters." Catherine stepped closer. "You could have stayed quiet, protected yourself. I'd rather speak the truth and be hated for it than be silent and watched with suspicion." Catherine looked at her like seeing her for the first time. "You're not what I expected." "Good," Maggie whispered. "Neither are you." That night, Catherine did not sleep in the adjoining room. When the maids came to ask, she dismissed them. She didn't explain. She didn't owe anyone explanations. Maggie was already in bed, her back to the door, when Catherine entered in silence. She undressed slowly, folding her coat and placing it on the chair, then slipped under the covers without a word. They lay in the dark, 2 inches of space between them. The air hummed with words unsaid. "You don't have to stay," Maggie said softly. "I know." "Then why are you here?" Catherine turned her head toward her. "Because I didn't want to be anywhere else." Maggie closed her eyes. She didn't reach out. Neither Dallas did. But the silence between them had changed. Not distance now, just tension. Like the breath before a kiss. Like the hush before thunder. Over the next few days, things shifted further.
Slowly.
Deliberately. They shared meals, sometimes with words, sometimes just presence. Maggie continued to leave notes in Catherine's study. Now they received answers. Brief, clipped, sometimes sarcastic, but answers nonetheless. They began walking the gardens together after court. At first with guards at a distance, but eventually alone. And Catherine, ever watchful, began noticing things. The way Maggie ran her fingers along the stone railings, as if memorizing their texture. The way she stopped to greet every servant, learn every name. The way she softened rooms simply by existing in them. One evening, in the royal stables, Maggie approached one of Catherine's horses, a temperamental mare no one dared touch, and the beast calmed instantly under her hand. Catherine watched from the doorway, unable to look away. "She doesn't trust anyone," Catherine said. "She does now," Maggie replied without turning. "Maybe she just needed patience." Catherine's voice was quieter. "She's not the only one, but not everyone shared their peace." In shadowed corners of the palace, whispers grew. "The princess is softening. The Astrian woman holds her ear. The alliance has made her weak." And beyond the palace, the forces near Blackridge moved again. This time closer, bolder. Someone wanted this peace broken. And soon, neither love nor crown would be enough to stop what was coming. The morning air was unusually sharp for late spring. A fine mist curled along the stone walkways of the palace, catching in the folds of Maggie's cloak as she crossed the northern corridor alone, her thoughts heavy, her fingers curled around the edge of a parchment she hadn't yet dared show Catherine. The report had arrived just before dawn, a second incursion, deeper into Valerian territory. Smaller numbers, but more precise, strategic. Someone was testing the borders. And Maggie didn't believe for a moment that it was random. She pushed open the door to the small study that had become Catherine's private retreat. The princess was already there, seated at the tall window with a fresh document spread across her lap and ink staining her fingertips. Her posture, as always, was perfect.
Composed. Still.
But Maggie had learned to see the tension behind it. "You've heard," Maggie said softly. Catherine didn't turn. "Yes." "Do you think it's Astoria?" "Not officially."
A pause.
"But the armor is theirs." Maggie's throat tightened. "Then it's internal. Or deliberately made to look like it. Someone wants this alliance shattered." "Yes," Catherine said, finally looking up. Her eyes met Maggie's, and the weight of that gaze sent a tremor down Maggie's spine. "And they're using you to do it." "Me?" "Not you," she corrected. "Your name, your flag, your bloodline. To make it seem like I betrayed you." Catherine didn't answer, but she didn't look away. Maggie moved closer. "You don't believe that, do you?" "No," Catherine said quietly. "But the court does."
Some of them.
"They're watching you, measuring your steps." "Then let them measure." Maggie's voice rose with quiet fire. "I'll prove myself." Catherine stood abruptly. "You shouldn't have to." "And yet I will." Her voice was steel now, not silk. "Because what we're building here between us is worth defending, even if no one else sees it yet." Something cracked, just slightly, in Catherine's expression. She reached out and brushed her fingers along Maggie's wrist. "I see it." And Maggie, who had spent weeks navigating rejection, found herself holding back tears not from sorrow, but from the quiet, overwhelming relief of finally being seen. That night, A formal dinner was held in honor of the visiting ambassador from West Illyria, a neutral state whose trade support was vital to both Astoria and Valeria. The room gleamed with gold and crystal, laughter echoing across high-vaulted ceilings, the scent of roasted duck and cinnamon wine heavy in the air. Catherine entered first, every inch the commanding princess, her presence as arresting as it was cold. But when Maggie appeared beside her, elegant in sapphire silk, her hand resting lightly in the crook of Catherine's arm, the court fell silent for half a breath too long. They walked together to the high table. They sat together. And when the ambassador bowed low and said, "Your Highnesses," Catherine answered without hesitation, "My wife speaks for us both." That alone sent a ripple through the room. Maggie leaned in slightly. "Was that for diplomacy?" "No," Catherine replied under her breath. "That was for me." The next days blurred with tension. Every conversation was layered. Every step watched. Catherine doubled the guards at the southern wall. Maggie requested more eyes in the archives. And through it all, they circled one another like constellations pulling closer, still distant, still cautious, but no longer resisting the gravity between them. One afternoon, Maggie found herself in the palace greenhouse, an enormous structure of glass and iron, warm with the scent of soil and blooming orange trees. She was alone, or so she thought. "You favor solitude," Catherine's voice came from the doorway. "Sometimes," Maggie said, smiling faintly. "But I was hoping you'd find me." Catherine stepped inside. Her cloak swirled behind her, and for once, she wasn't wearing the usual military red, but deep green velvet, embroidered with silver thread. It made her look softer, younger. "You've been reading the archives," Catherine said. "Yes."
Why?
"Because the last time Astoria and Valeria faced unrest, it didn't begin at the borders. It began in the court." Catherine's gaze sharpened. "You think the traitor is here. I think they're close enough to be dangerous." Catherine walked toward her, stopping just inches away. "Then we need to be closer too." "Is that strategy?" Maggie asked, teasing gently. Catherine's voice dropped. "Not tonight." A pause.
A breath.
"You asked me to tell you something no one else knows." I never answered. "No," Maggie whispered. "You didn't." Catherine looked her straight in the eye. "I've never let anyone touch me without armor." Maggie's eyes flickered to the velvet coat. "You're not wearing any now." "I'm trying." "So am I." The air between them grew impossibly thick. Catherine reached out, slowly, as if giving Maggie time to stop her. She didn't. Her fingers brushed Maggie's cheek, then her jaw, her palm finally cupping her face. Maggie leaned into the touch, without hesitation. "Tell me to stop," Catherine said, her voice cracking. "No," Maggie said. "Please don't." And when they kissed, it was not the hesitant, ceremonial kiss of their wedding. It was raw and desperate and full of the ache of waiting too long. Catherine pressed Maggie gently against the glass wall, lips parted, hands trembling, and Maggie held her like she had never wanted anything more in her life. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Catherine rested her forehead against Maggie's. "If they come for us," she whispered, "I won't let them win." "Then we fight together," Maggie said. "Always." That night, a servant loyal to Catherine intercepted a sealed scroll meant for a foreign informant. Inside was a coded message: "Disrupt from within. Ensure the princess doubts her bride. The union must fracture." Catherine read the message in silence, jaw tight. When she looked up at Elric, her voice was deadly calm. "Find who wrote this." Quietly. "Yes, Your Highness." Catherine turned toward the window, where Maggie stood in the courtyard below, speaking to a group of young pages. Her laughter reached even here. And Catherine swore, right then, that no blade, no whisper, no kingdom would take that light from her. The palace had never felt so alive and so dangerous. Beneath the polished marble and soft torchlight, the corridors of Valeria were crawling with tension, invisible but suffocating. Catherine walked them like a queen already in mourning, sharp, calculated, armor-clad in silence. The intercepted scroll still burned in her mind, its message etched into every thought like a poison that refused to fade, disrupt from within. Ensure the princess doubts her bride. Someone was inside.
Close.
Watching. She trusted Elric with the investigation, but even that trust felt brittle. The danger wasn't on the battlefield anymore. It was seated at her table, maybe even bowing in her throne room. But the worst part? Maggie didn't know. Catherine hadn't told her.
Not yet.
She couldn't. Not when their newfound bond was still forming, delicate as silk threads stretched too far. One wrong word could unravel everything. Maggie noticed the change almost immediately. Catherine still sought her company, still came to bed without armor, still touched her with the same hesitant reverence that made Maggie's heart ache. But her eyes were distant, her mind elsewhere.
Distracted.
"You're protecting something again," Maggie said one night as they sat together in the garden alcove. The air smelled of lilac and damp stone. "Not from you," Catherine said quickly. "Then why can't you look me in the eyes?" Catherine turned slowly, gaze locking onto hers with quiet intensity. "Because if I do, I'll tell you something that could change everything between us." Maggie swallowed. "And if I want to hear it anyway? Then you're braver than I am." Maggie leaned in. "Catherine, if we are truly partners in this, I can face the same truths you do." Catherine closed her eyes, her voice a whisper. "There's a traitor in the palace. Someone trying to destroy our marriage from within. They've already made moves to discredit you." Maggie went still, but not shocked, not angry. She only nodded slowly, breathing in. "Of course they have." Catherine blinked. "You're not surprised? I was raised in a court, too. I know how quietly daggers are drawn when you smile too brightly." Catherine's lips parted, the smallest crack of wonder and guilt in her voice. "You were ready for this?" "No," Maggie said softly. "But I was ready for you." That broke something in Catherine. She reached forward, cupping Maggie's face like she had in the greenhouse, only this time with more urgency. "If they touch you, then we fight back," Maggie interrupted.
Together.
"That's the vow we made, isn't it?" Catherine's breath trembled. She kissed her, not desperate, not panicked, but slow and steady, as if trying to carve a memory so deep that no threat could ever erase it. And when they parted, Maggie whispered, "Tell me everything." And Catherine did. Every word, every suspicion, every doubt, every clue. Together, they laid out a map of betrayal in candlelight. 3 names rose to the surface. Lord Theron of the Western Trade Guild, publicly loyal, privately disgraced by Astoria's market rise. Lady Brennell, one of Catherine's childhood tutors, discreet, pious, and deeply opposed to any foreign influence in the royal family. And Sir Damos, commander of the Outer Patrol, a man whose father had died in a border skirmish decades ago. "We watch all 3, Catherine said. "We send false information, test their reactions. If they leak it, we'll know." "And until then?" Maggie asked. Catherine's expression was colder than Maggie had ever seen it. "We smile. We dance. We play the perfect wives." The next evening, a royal ball was held in the Moonlight Hall. It was a lavish distraction meant to soothe unrest. Catherine knew better. Balls were perfect hunting grounds for whispers and knives wrapped in compliments. She wore a gown the color of shadow, her sword hanging not from her hip, but from her voice, her posture. Maggie stood beside her in moonlit silver, soft curls falling over one shoulder, and eyes that saw far more than anyone gave her credit for. They greeted nobles, laughed at calculated jokes, accepted praise with gracious nods. They played their parts perfectly, but beneath the surface, they watched. Every glance, every change in tone, every passing servant who walked too slowly. Then Maggie caught it. A message being passed from Lady Brunel's sleeve to a page, and the page to a courier at the servants' entrance. She leaned into Catherine, whispering, "South corridor."
Now.
Catherine didn't hesitate. The 2 of them slipped away under the guise of fatigue, their hands brushing as they walked. It was a lie. They were fire beneath silks. In the corridor, They caught the courier. The message wasn't coded this time. Target the bride's reputation. Suggest infidelity. Suggest manipulation. If the people lose faith, the crown follows. Catherine's blood turned to ice. Maggie read it and handed it back. Then we expose them. Catherine gripped her hand. We strike tomorrow. With truth, Maggie said. Not blood. For now. That night in their chambers, Catherine paced. They'll double down. This won't end with rumors. The moment they realize we're onto them, they'll go for something bigger. Maggie rose from the bed, wrapping a silk robe around her shoulders. She walked toward Catherine, catching her wrist. Then we end it first. Catherine looked at her.
How?
We show them what we are. Which is what, Maggie? Unbreakable. And this time it was Maggie who kissed her first. Fierce, bold, grounding. And when they pulled apart, Catherine whispered, I don't deserve you. Then rise to meet me. And in her eyes, Catherine saw not a bride, but a queen. The trap was elegant, discreet, beautifully cruel. Exactly as Catherine expected. 3 days after the intercepted message, Lord Theron invited Catherine and Maggie to a private luncheon under the pretense of celebrating the success of the new royal union. The letter, delivered by his personal courier, was laced with carefully chosen words about loyalty, legacy, and the strength of two nations intertwined by faith. It was too flattering, too rehearsed, and Catherine, who had survived both war councils and assassination attempts, read the performance in every syllable. But she accepted. Maggie, upon hearing the plan, didn't flinch. You want to walk into a lion's den just to bait them? Yes, Catherine answered simply. Because they already believe you're vulnerable. Because they think I can be turned against you. Maggie tilted her head. Can you? Catherine met her gaze. No one touches you. Not while I breathe. And that, Maggie thought, was the most romantic thing she had ever heard. The luncheon was held in a secluded garden pavilion behind Lord Theron's estate, nestled along the outer hills of Valeria. Stone columns framed climbing vines, and fountains whispered from either side of a polished silver table. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Lord Theron greeted them with an obsequious smile. Lady Brennel was already seated. Sir Damos arrived last, his armor replaced with velvet robes and a polished cane. They were too relaxed. Too ready. The servants poured wine. Dishes were presented. Formalities exchanged. And then the real conversation began. I must say, Theron began, his voice smooth as oil, the public has responded so warmly to your union. They speak of a new era. A gentle queen and a steel-hearted princess. How poetic. Maggie smiled, slow and deliberate. We've always believed strength is strongest when it has something worth protecting. Lady Brennel sipped her wine. And is that how you see your marriage, Princess Catherine? As protection. Catherine's voice didn't waver. I see it as a line no one is permitted to cross. The smiles faded, just a little. Sir Damos leaned forward. Surely, Your Highness, you must consider the implications. If Astoria were to fall into instability, say, it could weaken the entire alliance. A queen who loves too deeply might struggle to see betrayal clearly. And a general who speaks in riddles might struggle to keep his tongue. Catherine replied, ice cold. Theron raised a hand. Let's not pretend we're here for politics. We're here because we care about Valeria's future. No, Maggie said gently. You're here because you thought you could isolate me. Catherine's hand slid across the table, her fingers covering Maggie's. You thought I wouldn't be at her side, Catherine continued. You thought you could discredit her, weaken her, divide us. Theron's smile faltered. You have no proof. We do now, Maggie said, sliding a parchment from her sleeve. A copy of the intercepted letter. Brunel's eyes widened. Damos went still. You used royal couriers, Catherine said. You used the Queen's ink, the seal of the South Archive, and a stable boy who confessed in tears after your last meeting. You planned to fracture the crown, Maggie added. But it never occurred to you that love might be stronger than fear. You'll regret this, Brunel spat, rising. No, Catherine said. You will. By nightfall, the arrests had been made. Quietly, efficiently. Darren's estate was searched. Correspondence confiscated. His name stripped from every official ledger by royal decree. Brunel was exiled to the Hollow Isles. Damos, after a brief tribunal, was imprisoned under high guard. Catherine didn't celebrate. Neither fez Maggie. Instead, they returned to the palace in silence. The kind of silence that came not from distance, but from sheer emotional weight. When they reached their chambers, Catherine turned to Maggie in the doorway. You could have stayed out of it. You didn't have to step into that room. Maggie held her gaze. Yes, I did. Why? Catherine asked, voice breaking with something fragile. Because I love you, Maggie said simply. Because they wanted to make me afraid, and I refused to be afraid of love. Catherine stared at her. Just stared. As if the words were a spell. Then she stepped forward, cupped Maggie's face with both hands, and kissed her like she was choosing her, fully, finally, without hesitation. That night, there was no distance between them. No politics. No crown. No fear. Only two women, tangled in moonlight, breathing each other in like salvation. Catherine woke with Maggie curled against her chest, and for the first time in her life, the weight of duty didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a shield, because now she had something worth protecting. Not a kingdom, not a treaty, but a woman who had walked through fire just to stay at her side. Catherine was not prepared for how quiet the palace became after the arrests. It wasn't peace. It was caution. A silence made of glances that held too long, bows that dipped a fraction deeper, and courtiers who spoke only when spoken to. The walls of Valeria were listening more than ever now. The traitors had fallen, yes, but the truth was worse than a coup. They'd dared to try. That knowledge weighed on Catherine, even more than the crown on her head or the sword at her hip. But what surprised her more, what unsettled her in ways she didn't fully understand, was how steady Maggie remained. No fear. No flinching. She moved through the palace with the same calm she'd shown on the day of their wedding. If anything, she stood taller now, straighter, and the people noticed. They bowed to her with growing sincerity. Some even smiled. Servants whispered her name with genuine reverence. Maggie was becoming a queen before anyone realized the transition had even begun. One evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the eastern colonnade, Catherine found herself watching her from afar. Maggie was speaking with a group of foreign visitors from the Southern Isles, her voice measured, her gestures graceful. She carried herself with elegance, but not arrogance. Authority, but not intimidation. Catherine felt something fierce twist in her chest. Not jealousy. Not even pride. It was something older.
Deeper.
She loved her. Utterly. Irrevocably. And that terrified her. That night, Catherine waited in their chambers long after the lamps had been lit. Maggie entered quietly, shrugging off her cloak. Her cheeks were pink from the cool air. You're late, Catherine said, softer than she meant to. Maggie raised an eyebrow. I was asked to speak with the Textile Guild. Their steward wants to reopen Astrian trade routes before the frost sets in. Catherine nodded. You were brilliant today. Maggie looked up in surprise. I watched you, Catherine added, with a southern envoys.
Oh.
A pause. Then, softly, thank you. Catherine rose. There's something I need to say. Maggie straightened, her expression careful. All right. I told myself I would never let love compromise my judgment. That attachment was a weakness I couldn't afford. But you've made me question everything I believed about power, about loyalty, about what it means to stand beside someone, not above them. Maggie stepped closer. Do you regret that? No, Catherine's voice cracked. It terrifies me, but I don't regret it. Maggie smiled, slow and certain. Then let it terrify you, and stay anyway. Catherine reached out, hands brushing Maggie's waist. I want you here, not as obligation, not as symbol, as mine. Yours, Maggie echoed, resting her forehead against Catherine's. And you mine. That night, the barriers fell. Every piece of armor Catherine had ever worn, emotional and otherwise, was surrendered in Maggie's arms. They made love slowly, reverently, like prayer. Every kiss was a vow, every sigh a surrender. And afterward, they lay tangled beneath silk sheets, skin flushed, breath slowing, hearts louder than the wind against the windows. Catherine whispered, "Do you think this can last?" Maggie answered without hesitation, "Only if we choose it. Again. Every day." Catherine closed her eyes. "Then I'll choose you until my last breath." The quiet held them for hours. But just before dawn, a knock shattered it. Elric entered with urgency carved into his expression. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Highness. But there's news." Catherine sat up. "Speak." "There's been a breach." "Where?" "The eastern border. This time it wasn't a test. It was an army." Silence. Maggie sat up beside her, sheet clutched to her chest. "From Astoria?" "No," Elric said grimly. "Unknown origin. But they fly black flags. No sigils. No warning." Catherine stood. "Casualties?"
Minimal.
"So far. But they came fast. Organized. Precise. Like they knew our rotations." Catherine's jaw clenched. "How long until they reach the outer cities?" 2 days. Maybe less." Maggie rose, pulling her robe around her shoulders. Who would attack now, after all the unrest? Catherine's voice was iron. "Someone who waited for us to be distracted. Someone who thought we'd be too tangled in our own court to see them coming." Elric nodded. "I've already summoned the council. But they'll expect a declaration by morning." Catherine glanced at Maggie. "You're not safe here anymore."
"Then I stay," Maggie said.
"Beside you. In the war room, not behind it." Catherine wanted to argue, to protect her. But Maggie was already moving, already slipping into a tunic, already transforming from consort to co-strategist before her eyes. Catherine whispered, "You were never meant for the shadows, were you?" Maggie's smile was fierce.
"No."
"And neither were you." Together, they stepped into the corridor, 2 queens walking into the storm. By sunrise, the palace would be preparing for war. The war room of Valeria had never held 2 queens. Not like this. The long oak table, carved with generations of military maps and royal etchings, now bore the presence of both Catherine Blackwood, warrior, strategist, sovereign, and Margaret Thorne, diplomat, scholar, heart of the crown. They stood side by side as generals pored over reports, lines of enemy movement etched in charcoal and red ink. The unknown army had struck swiftly. Black banners, no insignias. Their armor was dark, silent, without royal marks. Mercenaries? Rebels? Shadows of a force no one recognized? It didn't matter. They were efficient, brutal, and they were advancing. Catherine's voice cut through the air like a drawn blade. "We reinforce the east wall with the 2nd Cavalry. Shift the archers from Iron Hill to flank the river bend. They'll expect our defense at the main gate, not the bank. And the villagers between the ridge and the city." Maggie asked, scanning the civilian reports. "Evacuated or sheltered underground," Catherine replied. "I gave the order an hour ago." "I want to go," Maggie said suddenly. "To the ridge towns. To speak to them myself." "Absolutely not," Catherine snapped. "You'd be a target. And if I go as queen, publicly, visibly, I become a symbol of unity. I calm fear. And I'll be surrounded by your best guards. Don't tell me I'm safe behind a wall when we both know this battle is already at the gate." Catherine stared at her. And the terrifying thing was she was right. "You'll take Elric. And 3 of the ivory blades." Maggie nodded. "Done." Their eyes locked, a silent vow exchanged in the breath between them. Maggie's visit to the ridge towns rippled like wildfire. Word spread. The queen had come. Not sent an envoy, not a letter. She came herself. She walked through muddy courtyards, hugged crying children, spoke with village elders, and offered both royal support and gentle grace. And in her wake, people began to believe again. Not just in their country, but in her. By the time she returned to the palace, dusk was bleeding across the sky, and Catherine was waiting at the gates, pacing. When Maggie dismounted, Catherine didn't speak. She just crossed the courtyard and pulled her into a tight, desperate embrace. "You came back," Catherine whispered. "Of course I did," Maggie murmured into her neck. "I always will." But the embrace ended too quickly. Elric approached with grim news. "Scouts report movement. They'll reach the outer walls by sunrise." Catherine's body tensed. "Tell the commanders. We hold the gates." "There's more." Elric hesitated. "They have siege weapons." Catherine froze. "We have to evacuate the lower districts." "Already in progress," Maggie said, stepping forward. "I told them to begin at first light. They're ready." Catherine looked at her as if seeing her for the 100th time. "You think like a sovereign. I've had the best teacher." That night, the palace prepared for war. Torches blazed. Armor clinked. Horses were saddled. Catherine dressed in black leather, sword strapped to her back, her hair braided tight. Maggie stood beside her, dressed not as a warrior, but as a queen, regal, commanding, her voice echoing through the halls as she gave orders and comfort alike. In the hours before dawn, they sat alone in the solar. It might be their last quiet moment. "Do you remember the garden?" Catherine asked softly. "After the first council meeting, when we said almost nothing?" "I remember thinking you would never look at me," Maggie said. "I remember being afraid of you." "And now?" Catherine asked. "Now I'm only afraid of losing you." Catherine reached across the space between them, their fingers laced. "Then don't. Stay alive. That's an order." Maggie smiled, tears shining. "I'll obey for once." Dawn came like fire. The black-bannered army surged over the hilltops with eerie silence. Catherine rode at the front, armor gleaming beneath the red sky. Her sword was unsheathed before the first horn sounded. Maggie stood atop the east tower, directing the movement of civilians, a map in one hand and a spyglass in the other. The first wave hit hard. Explosions shook the stone walls. Arrows rained from above. Catherine fought like legend. Blades clashed, blood soaked the ground, and yet she moved with terrifying precision. But they were outnumbered. Severely. Elric rode to her side. "They'll breach within the hour. We need the queen to leave." "No," Catherine snapped. We hold. We hold until Maggie gives the signal." "What signal?" "You'll know." In the tower, Maggie read every shift like a code. The way the enemy changed formation. The frequency of their flares. She wasn't a soldier, but her mind worked faster than anyone expected. And then she saw it. A blind spot. A vulnerable line near the rear barricade, just wide enough to split the enemy if hit with speed. She seized the bell rope. One toll. Long and low. Catherine heard it across the field. "Rear flank," she shouted. "Follow me." She led a dozen riders through the side gate. The enemy didn't see it coming. Within minutes, chaos erupted. The Dark Army split in two, their coordination broken. The Valerian cavalry surged, finally gaining ground. Back in the tower, Maggie exhaled for the first time in hours. "She saw it," she whispered. "She saw me." The battle raged until dusk. But slowly, inch by inch, Valeria pushed them back. When the final horn blew and the last enemy soldier dropped his weapon and fled into the hills, the entire kingdom seemed to exhale. Victory. Bloody, battered, impossible, but real. Catherine dismounted and staggered toward the tower. Maggie was already racing down the stairs. When they collided, it wasn't quiet. It was desperate.
Fierce.
Their arms around each other, mud and blood forgotten. Catherine pressed her forehead to Maggie's. "You saved us. You saw the signal." "I see everything you are," Catherine whispered. "And I would fight 1,000 wars for you." Maggie kissed her. Hard.
Fast.
Triumphant. The kind of kiss that silenced every doubt, every fear. They had survived. Together. And the world would never look at them the same again. The black banners were gone, but the smell of war still clung to the stones of Valeria. For days, the palace didn't sleep. Fires smoldered where arrows had pierced wood, and the once lush gardens bore deep wounds in the soil where soldiers had bled. Victory, though claimed, had not come without cost. Catherine stood in the Hall of Records as reports were brought in, survivor counts, wounded lists, border conditions. Every number marked a life. Every ink blot bled with consequence. They never spoke, she said, her voice low. Not a single word. No names. No sigils. No surrender. Maggie stood beside her, arms crossed over her chest. That doesn't sound like rebels. It's not. It's something else. Catherine's eyes were dark. And I intend to find out what. The surviving enemy soldiers had been taken prisoner, silent, uncooperative, and strangely identical in their discipline. No matter how much pressure was applied, none gave answers. No identity. No origin. And that silence echoed louder than screams. That night, while the city celebrated in the outer circles with cautious joy, Catherine met with her council behind sealed doors. There was help from within, she said. No force moves like that without information, exact maps of our borders, our rotations. Someone is still feeding them. Elric leaned forward. You think the previous conspirators weren't acting alone?
No.
I think they were pawns. The real hand remains unseen. Maggie, who had said little during the meeting, spoke up. What if this isn't about Valeria alone? Catherine turned to her. What do you mean? What if someone wanted the Alliance to survive just long enough to consolidate our strengths in one place and then destroy both at once? Silence fell. Astoria, Elric muttered. You think they'll be attacked next? If they haven't been already, Maggie said. We need to send a message. No, Catherine said. We go. 2 nights later, under a sky streaked with distant thunderclouds, Catherine and Maggie rode out with a royal envoy toward Astoria. It was a calculated risk, one that made the council uneasy. But the Queen of Valeria refused to lead from safety. Let the world see that we don't run, Catherine had told them. Let them see that 2 queens ride side by side, because fear does not govern our throne. The journey took 3 days. Through mist, across rivers, and into the emerald hills that marked Asturian territory. But what awaited them on the 4th morning was not diplomacy. It was devastation. The gates of Astoria were open, broken inward. Smoke curled from the high towers. Bodies lay half-buried in rubble. Soldiers with wide, glassy eyes greeted them with blood-stained armor. The attack was swift, said one general, limping forward. They came in the night. Banners of black. No warning. Maggie's face paled. How many? Too many. Your rulers? Catherine asked.
Alive.
Injured but alive. The princess, your sister, she's asking for you. Maggie rode through the ruined courtyard without hesitation. Catherine followed. In a scorched hall, Maggie fell to her knees beside a battered cot where her younger sister, Elise, lay with a bandaged arm and dried blood on her brow. Maggie, she whispered. You came. Of course I came, Maggie said, choking. You're my family. Elise looked toward Catherine, eyes wary but grateful. Thank you for bringing her. Catherine bowed her head. Valeria stands with Astoria. Elise's hand shook. This wasn't an isolated strike. They wanted our records, our magical codices, the sealed histories. They didn't take gold or jewels. Just knowledge. Knowledge of what? Catherine asked. Elise struggled to sit up. The founding lineages. Ancient bloodlines. Names that should have been forgotten. Something in Maggie's spine stiffened. What names? Elise hesitated.
Yours.
Mine. Hers. She looked at Catherine. You don't understand. You two, together it means something more. Someone wants to erase that lineage before it can awaken. Awaken. Maggie echoed. You speak in riddles. Not riddles, Elise said. Prophecies. Catherine and Maggie exchanged a look, equal parts disbelief and dread. You're telling me, Catherine began slowly, that this was never about politics, or territory, or even power. Elise nodded weakly. It's about legacy, about a bond that was never meant to survive. And you two defied it. A slow, crawling silence overtook them. Outside, a crow cawed once and then vanished into the clouds. Catherine spoke first. We need answers, not whispers. Then go to the Oracle of Dusk, Elise said. She lives in the ruin beneath the eastern ridge. She'll know the truth. You're too weak, Maggie whispered. You should rest. Elise grasped her hand. No time. You must go, before they strike again. Catherine turned to Maggie. We leave at first light. Maggie nodded.
Together.
That night, the two queens did not sleep. They sat in the shell of what had once been a royal court, firelight dancing against their faces, fingers interlocked. Do you believe in prophecy? Maggie asked softly. No, Catherine said. But I believe in us. And if someone wants to destroy us for what we've built, then we must be more powerful than we ever imagined. Then let's find out why, Maggie whispered. Before it's too late. As dawn broke, they mounted their horses, two sovereigns riding not to war, but toward a truth buried deeper than blood or history, toward an ancient secret, toward the end or the beginning of everything. The road to the eastern ridge was ancient and forgotten. Trees swallowed the path in a canopy of shadows, and the stone beneath the horses' hooves had long been fractured by time and neglect. No guards, no signs, only silence and a strange tension in the air, like the forest itself was watching. Catherine rode in front, one hand on the reins, the other resting on the hilt of her sword. Beside her, Maggie kept pace, her posture straighter than ever, her expression unreadable, but her eyes flicked toward every sound, every breeze that felt too cold for midsummer. Neither of them spoke. There were no words left to offer comfort, only questions and fear, and the fire of love burning bright in both of them despite it all. When the ridge appeared through the mist, they both halted. The rocks jutted from the earth, like the bones of something long dead. Beneath them, nestled in an open cavern draped with hanging moss and pale flowers, stood a ruin. What remained of a temple, worn columns, half a dome, and a door made not of stone, but of woven metal and silver thread. This is it, Maggie whispered. It has to be. Catherine dismounted, helping her down. She took Maggie's hand. If there's danger inside, then we face it. Together. The door opened as if it had heard them. No guard. No summons. Just a soft, musical creak. They entered. The chamber within pulsed with a low, rhythmic energy that felt older than language. Candles lit themselves in succession along the walls. Symbols lined the stone, spirals, circles, mirrored glyphs that glowed faintly as they passed. At the far end stood a woman, or something that once had been a woman. Her hair was silver and moved like smoke. Her skin shimmered like quartz, eyes pure violet. I've waited a long time for you, she said, her voice like wind through glass. You knew we would come? Catherine asked, stepping forward. The oracle nodded. The bond you forged was never just love. It was prophecy. It was defiance. Maggie's voice trembled. Why us? Because every few centuries, the oracle said, two souls are born aligned in a way the world resists. One forged in war, one born of compassion. Opposites. Equals. If they find each other, their union brings either ruin or renewal. And you think we're those souls? Catherine asked. I know you are. Then why are we being hunted? Maggie pressed. Because the last time this happened, the world chose ruin. The oracle turned. With a wave of her hand, a vision shimmered into existence behind her. Ghosts from 1,000 years ago. Two queens. One in armor, bloodied and fierce. One in white, eyes burning with fury. They stood against each other, then collapsed together as the world around them burned. They were lovers once, the oracle said, but fear divided them. Betrayal grew, and those who feared their power fed that doubt until war tore them apart. They died and kingdoms followed. Catherine swallowed hard. What does that have to do with us? You are their echo, the oracle said. Their second chance.
You wear their blood.
You stand in the same fire. Maggie stepped closer. And if we don't break the pattern, then your kingdoms fall, your love dies, and darkness spreads further than either of you can imagine. The vision faded. Silence pressed against their ribs. How do we stop it? Catherine asked. You already have, the oracle said softly. You trusted. You chose love over suspicion. You stayed when fear told you to run. Then why the attacks? Maggie demanded. Why the army, the betrayal? Because those who fed that fear still exist. They are ancient.
Hidden.
Watching. The oracle turned to Catherine. One remains in your court, Catherine. You know who. A chill swept down her spine. She did know. She had felt it, pushed it aside, pretended otherwise. Counselor Veller. The oracle nodded. He bears the mark. He has no loyalty to blood, only to prophecy, his version of it. He believes the world must burn again. Maggie shook her head. Then we stop him. It won't be with a sword, the oracle said. Not this time. Then how? Catherine asked. By standing in the light. Together.
Publicly.
Unapologetically. Unite your people through your love. Let them see what power truly looks like when shared. You're asking us to make a spectacle, Maggie said, raising an eyebrow. I'm asking you to make a stand, the oracle replied. The world has been ruled by fear for too long. Your union must become its answer. They understood. Not just as rulers, but as women who had been tested, broken, healed, and reborn. When they left the ruins, the forest no longer felt like it watched them with suspicion, but with hope. Back in Valeria, the council convened. Catherine and Maggie entered hand in hand, dressed in royal colors, Catherine in black and gold, Maggie in white and silver. The chamber was full. Nobles, soldiers, citizens, and at the center, Counselor Veller stood. You return in haste, he said, voice smooth, and yet without an army behind you. We brought something stronger, Catherine said. Truth. The oracle scroll, sealed and ancient, was placed on the table. Maggie spoke next. There are those who fear our bond, who think love like ours is weakness. But look around you. What has our love done but protect, unite, and survive? Murmurs rippled. Catherine stepped forward. Counselor Veller, you are charged with treason against the crown and conspiracy against the union. You will be held until trial. But hear this. Your fear ends today. He laughed once. You think love wins wars? No, Maggie said. But it ends them. Guards moved forward. Veller was taken. The chamber remained in stunned silence. Until one noble, then another stood. Then applause. A roar of support. Catherine turned to Maggie, hand tightening around hers. We did it. Maggie's eyes brimmed. We changed the ending. That night, the queen stood on the palace balcony as lanterns filled the sky, hundreds of them, each carrying a message, a prayer, a hope. Do you think it'll last? Maggie asked. Not just peace, but this. Catherine pulled her close. It will if we keep choosing it. Then let's choose it. Forever. Catherine kissed her under the lanterns, under the stars, under the gaze of a world that finally believed. Not in prophecy, not in fear, but in love that fought back and won.